Hi, I'm John DeDakis, and you're one-to-one with me, and I'm one-to-one with John Peragine. Did I pronounce that right, John?
Yes, it's
Okay.
you make it sound so much better than it really is. It's like pair of jeans you wear. So
Well, anyway, John is the author of 14 books. He's ghostwritten over 100 others. He writes for the New York Times, Reuters, Bloomberg, The Today Show, Writer's Digest. He's a wine enthusiast and more. His newest book, Max and the Spice Thieves, launches this fall, and he lives in Iowa overlooking his vineyard. So, welcome to One to One. It's good to see you again.
yeah, it's good to see you. We keep popping up in places we could never. I think the last time we saw each other was in California, maybe.
Was it California? I thought it was Madison, Wisconsin.
But then we met again.
Well, you have a better memory than I do.
Remember the
Sorry about
surprise
that.
meet? I think it was last October, or no, it
It
was
was
somewhere.
it was at least a year ago, and we had to do a presentation on marketing to
Right,
the University of Wisconsin's Writer Institute,
right.
and they ended up calling it the John and John Show, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
well, we're never going to do that one again. So tell me more about what you are up to these days. Give us sort of a thumbnail sketch of who you're a machine. I don't know when you have time to do interviews like this because you're writing all the time.
Yeah. Well, I figured I turned 50 this year, so I had to make sure I was keeping busy. So this time of year, I'm out in the vineyard whenever I'm not writing. So that I had installed about 3 years ago. So I should be able to do something with that this year. I'm hoping you're still there, John, because it looked like you disappeared. So I might
I
be.
did because this is about me. It's not about you. I'm just
I was like, I
yeah,
hope I'm
I'm
not
just
talking to empty air.
yeah, no, you're howling into the void there, dude. So go
Okay.
ahead and howl.
Okay. All right. I'll just keep going. So yeah. So this year I'll have. I'll have. Look, there's been shows where I have been talking for 10 minutes and there's like nothing going on. So that keeps me busy in my off time. I'm finishing up Max and the Spice Thieves, and that was a book that up to now I've really been really focused on nonfiction writing. So when my son was young, he's 8 now. So when he was younger, he was sick, and we had to spend a lot of time in hospitals. And so to pass the time, because a lot of it was just sitting in a room, and he was kind of afraid, there was a lot going on. So I started writing a story, I think mostly to help myself, but to help him too, kind of through that time. And so I wrote about a chapter a night, and in the evening, at bedtime, I would read him the chapter. So it was a continuing story in which he was the hero of the story. And everything that he was fighting with, the reason he was in the hospital became kind of a superpower. So this was a fantasy novel, kind of set in a fantasy world of pirates, and in fact, spice pirates. So I had time to kill, so I was just creating this story. So he did get better, and about 2 years ago, he came home from school one day and he said, "So where's my book?" I said, "Well, what book?" He said, "That book you wrote for me. I told all my friends in class they're going to get a copy." I said, "I never really intended to publish that book. That was just something between me and you." He says, "Well, look, he was in kindergarten at the time." He said, "Well, I promised everybody." And he says, "This is what you do, so just do it, Dad." I said, "Okay." So it's been the 2-year journey to create that book. So it's finally going to come out this fall, which is a totally different beast than nonfiction that I've been writing. I had to learn new skills, and so even though I wrote.
Well, what are the different skills? What's the difference between writing fiction and nonfiction
Oh
besides
God.
the fact that one is true and one is not?
Well, and I think the biggest thing is the structure and things like dialogue. So even though I wrote some dialogue within memoirs and stuff like that, I was just creating this whole world. And the other thing that I didn't know was all the rules of genre. And so when I first started pitching the book to agents and to publishers, I didn't really know what the book was. I just thought, that was young, YA, young adult. I was really wrong because it turned out to be middle grade fantasy. And there's just certain things they expect in certain genres. There's certain things that readers expect. So my book was written in third person. I had to change that to write it to first person. I had to change the age. I had to change the language. Some of the stuff that I thought was cool wasn't so cool for kids, so I had to tone down the violence, change the language, kind of make them nicer pirates than they were. So that was a process. I mean, you go from third person an entire novel to first person, that took about 6 months. And even then, going through the edits, it was so many things I got wrong, right? So thank God for editors, and I'm on my last edit now. But it was definitely a process, and it was definitely something I had to learn because I had to go back and read and figure out those genres, because without it, how in the world I was going to market it wrong? And it was
exactly. How long ago was it that your first novel was published, and did you always know that you wanted to be a novelist?
This is it, man. This is the first novel. Everything else I've written is nonfiction.
So those 14 books that you've written are nonfiction?
Books. Yeah.
About what? About what?
So the last few of them were about wine and wine history. And that was just something I got interested in. So those were historical. Some of the earlier books that I wrote were small business books and stuff, books I had no business writing. But, it's funny, when I got with a publisher, they started telling me books that they'd like to see me write. So, I think the funniest one was early on was a book on the publisher had a book, they were marketing it. Something I never found out what happened to the original author of the book. They said, but we have all this material. We just need you to finish writing this book. It was on wedding planning. And I said, okay, you're going to put my name on a book for wedding planning. Okay, I'll write that. And this is kind of almost getting into ghostwriting. I said, but please don't make me look like something I'm not, don't put a whole lot of flowers and, make me look pretty in the book. I said, at least give me the decency of writing a book on, and it still sells well. And it's just, it was kind of an interesting book because I had to learn what wedding planning was and meet with wedding planners and go through that whole process of
well, it sounds like there's actually a novel there too. You could probably
yeah, it probably is.
I have your website on the screen, John at johnpwriter.com. If someone goes there, would they be able to find out?
johnpwriter.com is the
Oh, that's right. That's your email. Is that the way you want people to reach you?
Yeah, that's the easiest way. Or they can
what about your website? Say so johnpwriter.com is your
website.
Okay, well then I'll write that down. Let's talk about ghostwriting for a minute, because you say you've got 100 books that are ghostwritten.
Yeah.
How does that work?
I started by writing. So before I was a writer, I was a social worker. And also I played in a symphony orchestra. Of course, that leads into writing, right? And so, I'd started writing for magazines, and I had gotten into writing books, but I got so many questions about how to do it, right? And the thing about writing books, as you know, if you want to make a living at it, which I really wanted to make, you have to continue to produce and produce and produce and produce. And so I just got into ghostwriting, and I think it kind of came from people saying, hey, can you look at this book, or can you edit this book, or can you give me pointers? And I just found I was just rewriting it, and so I just kind of got into that. And I think my background in psychology and in social work kind of allowed me to kind of develop some interviewing skills, which of course later led to me working in journalism. But it's really kind of that process of getting into somebody's head, because you have to write like them. When people ask me what are my, this is, some people don't understand, what are my typical kind of clients, who do I write for? And I said, well, recently it's been Black women, which sounds odd, right? Especially in the times we live in, but apparently I can somehow help them with their books and that
with their voice.
But you do have to kind of get into their head and not only get what they're talking about, but you have to sound like them when writing it, because by the time they're reaching it and kind of tweaking it, they may not have any writing skills, or they may not have the time. So they have to produce a book that, unless they told anybody that had any help, nobody would ever guess. Although, as you know, in the industry, many books are ghostwritten, especially memoirs and books like that. Just because.
How much time does it take to turn around a book? I mean, you must have to really crank these out.
Yeah, and the thing about them is, books kind of overlap, because they're at different stages. So if I'm just starting a book, there may be a book that I'm just waiting for edits, which that can take a month or two, so I can start a new project. So there's lots of overlapping over time of different projects, and some of them are shorter. Some of them, they've written a good amount of material, and they just need somebody to kind of finish it and polish it and getting it ready for editing. So there's just different levels there, depending on how much material they have to begin with. The longer projects, which are, hey, I'd really like the book, I have kind of an idea. Of course, that's going to take about a year, but it's not something, writers aren't machines. So we don't sit in front of a computer writing 10 hours a day. I may be working by doing other things that go along with the writing part, but to sit more than, if I wrote for 6 hours in a day, that's a big day. That's a whole lot of writing.
Yeah.
But you kind of get, but it's just like any other skill. Once you start writing that often, it becomes much easier to do. You worked on a show that, people got ideas in the morning and were able to write, scripts and stuff by the afternoon or evening. So,
oh, well, there were things that had to be written within 10 minutes or less.
Right.
So,
right.
But they were also 30 seconds or less. So
Right.
It's the same, but here's my question. If you're ghostwriting, by definition, your name's not on it. So how do you, I don't know, shelve your ego and be okay with that?
I'm okay with it because, from my point of view, I'm helping people write books. And I think, from my standpoint, the markets are so flooded with books now that some of them are good, some of them aren't. So if somebody's really serious about, a lot of the people I work with have businesses. So if they're really serious about writing a book, then I'm providing them a service to get to where they want to. So I'm always glad to hear, that, I'll get the phone call, hey, I got the books, or there was a successful thing, look at this picture of this. So I'm very excited for them. Do I have regret? Well, I wouldn't be human if I didn't see somebody really successful or hit New York Times bestseller list and say, wow, nobody ever knew that I wrote that. But I think over time I become okay with that, because I can still do what I want to do. So one kind of feeds the other. So if I'm ghostwriting, then I can do projects like my son's book and take my time.
And have you, now that you've actually got one of your own that's about to come out, are you noticing any kind of change in your, I don't know, your psychology, your emotions, just the approach you're taking now that your name is really on it?
Yeah, because it's a lot. I think now that my name's on it, it's my reputation, right? Ghostwriter can hide. If a book is successful or not as a ghostwriter, that's kind of a business thing. So that means that author may not hire you or refer you. So if their book's not successful, you're not going to be but writing a book with my name on it, and that's that close to me, is a totally different thing, because it's less about the money and it's more about it being good and people enjoying it. And actually, for this particular book, it's more about my son being happy with it, because
true.
He wants me to read him the rewrites. So I still spend time at night, and he's my go-to, because it has to sound like him, right? So I'm kind of ghostwriting him too,
Well, it's almost a collaboration. It's almost a collaboration, I guess.
Right, it is. So I have to get his voice right. Or I said, did I get that right? Would you have done that? So with him as the main character, I'm just having that light bulb go on now. I guess I'm still ghostwriting because I'm ghostwriting his book, his fantasy book.
I want to get back to writing and marketing and things like that, but I want to switch gears and talk about your wine enthusiasm. I mean, I know really honestly very little about wine. I had I, I had an experience with Ripple once, but you're talking about much more high end type stuff. So you're really a Renaissance man, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just the type person I got to have something going on, or I don't even know what. I mean, I've retired from 2 careers already at 50. So, it's just another thing that I enjoy doing. I enjoy making things. I guess that's I enjoy the creative part of it. So, what I didn't realize when I got into, I've been making wines for years, but out of somebody else's grapes or juice. So when I got into, the story behind the vineyard in my backyard was, there was a book that I wrote about the wine history of Rancho Cucamonga, California. And yes, that is a real place. And it's in Southern California. And it had a wine history that predated Napa and, Sonoma. This was back, when they had Spanish mission wines. And their big wine out there is Zinfandel. So I connected with this guy out there. We kind of made a deal that he wanted this book ghostwritten, but then he said, well, can you partner with me? And I said, okay. And then it came to, well, hey, why don't we negotiate you coming out, because he built vineyards. I said, why don't you come out and build a vineyard in my backyard as part of our deal? And so he did. And so that's what happened 3 years ago. So his book came out. I'm a co-writer, and I got a vineyard out of it. Now, what I didn't know is that having a vineyard's not that romantic thing you see on TV. It is just farming, and it's hard farming. And I'm learning how hard it is because my vineyard's on a hill, so it's up and down 50 steps every day just to go down to the vineyard. And so I'm fighting insects and diseases and animals, and I mean just all kind, learning to grow and all the viticulture, and so it's been an experience, I tell you.
Where in Iowa are you?
So I'm in Davenport, which is a quad city. So I'm right on the Mississippi River. So when I look out my back door, I'm looking across the river into Illinois. So I'm on that. So I'm on the.
And I grew up north of upstream. I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I know where the quad cities are.
So that's and the other thing was that the land here. So Davenport was settled by Colonel Davenport, and there's a whole history. The house that I'm in was part of his son's property, and at one time there was 6,000 vines out here. There was a vineyard. So his son, I'm leading to something. So his son's name was George Lost Davenport, Loste Davenport. So we call it the Lost Vineyard because it's the Lost Vineyard found, because we've redone the vineyard that was once here. Mm-hmm. And then recently my wife, because of COVID, quit her job, and we decided to start a publishing
company. A publishing company.
So it's Lost Vineyard Press. So we've kind of incorporated all of it together.
Whoa, I was going to go in another direction, but let's stop here and talk about your publishing company. When did it actually start, and what's the philosophy? How many books do you intend to publish a year? How can people get in touch with you? That kind of thing.
So we, that's a hard thing. This is our first year. We have, I think, 3 authors, maybe four authors. It's just another thing, John. It's another thing I'm getting into. I've been helping people publish their books for years. I know people in the industry. I know I know what goes on. What happens, and so there's kind of 2 types of books right now. Well, 3 types of books, I should say. kind of that business memoir book is kind of one of the imprints we're looking at. Max's book, Max and the Spice Thieves, we decided to publish that ourselves for a number of reasons. And so we have a kind of a children's, and then the histories, because there's a number of history books that I've written, and I also inherited, that's a whole nother story. I inherited a number of books from my teacher. He was my high school English teacher, and in his will, he had 2 novels and a number of short stories that he couldn't publish during his lifetime, and they're great books. So now I'm in the process of editing and publishing those.
What's it like being a publisher so far?
Oh man, it's a lot of work. Thank gosh my wife is, I'm kind of, showing her the ropes of doing it, because there's a lot more going into it. So what is it like? Well, the thing that people don't think about when they're writing a book. So when they first start with me, ghostwriting is, what are you going to do when that book is done? How are you going to market it? How are you going to get it out there? What are the ins and outs? Where do you put books where you're going to get it in the hands? And in the age that we are now, with the way publishing is and the way people are buying books, how do you get direct sales? Where are you looking for those direct sales? Are you looking for bulk sales? All those sorts of things that when people are trying to self-publish or even hybrid publishing, they don't really know. So that's kind of, so our philosophy is to really help people through that process, because traditional publishing, fantastic. Right now, don't know what the future of it is. Right. Just financially and everything else. And things were, I think the publishing companies and bookstores were in trouble prior to COVID. And now it's just turned everything upside down.
Will people be able to, in a sense, query you over the transom, or do you want to deal with agents? What's the best way to?
Either way. That's or so far we've had direct. We'll be glad to talk to agents too, and we're really going to get stuff really. As we're looking at books and preparing, we're looking into 2021 for any new queries. And people don't always understand that. I said, look, even if your book's done today, we got a lot of work prior to launch, because you have to give it time. And that's the thing people don't understand is, well, my book's done, it's edited, I'm ready to put it on Amazon. And I said, okay, when you sell that 100 books, then what are you going to do? Because that's usually about as many books as you're going to sell without a plan. I said, you have to have a launch plan and, advanced reader copies and getting it to reviewers. And that takes time. And so so we help create kind of that whole lead-in into the release of the book.
Are you discovering that most writers don't have a clue about the marketing side of things?
I think they understand some of it. I think they're becoming a little bit more savvy. A lot of people use social media, which is a really good way to start marketing, but there's so many other ways to do it. How do you get them into big box stores? What do returns look like? They don't understand if you're trying to do some of that stuff on your own, how things like returns could destroy you financially if you put out so many books and then the stores return them. So I think that they understand, at a surface level of how to get it, say, on Amazon through KDP or something like that. But I don't think that they always realize that of all of the time and actually financial investments sometimes. People don't understand the process of getting on bestsellers lists and what that process looks like, or how to get it in front of librarians and schools and things like that. So that's a process. Now,
is your publishing company? Do people have to pay you in order to get published, or how does that work financially?
We are kind of hybrid at this point, just because it costs money. But for the most part, we can offer services for people to do. But we're still trying to push toward more probably on the side of a traditional publisher. As we build up capital, because it takes money to make money. That we're kind of like at the hybrid stage right now, that we're sharing some of those costs. But for the most part, we are investing a lot of money into these authors. People don't realize what it costs. Even we're not at the point of giving, huge advances, but what people don't realize is even with an advance that a publishing company's sinking a whole lot of money into you. And there's, that's a whole different thing. That's the business side of books, and what that looks like. So if we put all this money into an author, what's the return look like? And so
now tell me the name of the publishing house again. I'm going to type it up and put it up on the screen.
Lost, Lost, and then there's an E at it. Lost Vineyard Press.
And is there a website or?
There is, yeah. There's Lost Vineyard Press.
Did I spell it right there?
You did.
You can tell this is a really high class operation. I'm the talent. I'm the producer. I switch it. I'm doing everything here, man. But what's the website?
It's lostvineyardpress.com.
God, you're clever.
Right? It's all about branding.
Exactly. Hold on just a second. It is. I'm going to keep that up like that. I'm going to create another banner. See, I'm talking myself through this. So it's Lost, VINEYARDPRESS.com.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then let's get that puppy up there. LostVineyardPress.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that on that website, it'll have everything that they need on how to get in touch with you.
Contact us. And, of course, now we're realizing what it looks like to have to read a bunch of inquiries, right? Because you're trying to get through, so it's starting to stack up a little bit.
Yes, exactly.
My wife loves to read, so I said, it's a perfect job. We do a whole lot of reading.
Right. And so that's good. Okay. I want to pivot because you live in Iowa. You've written for the New York Times and a number of other news organizations, reputable news organizations. So, Mike, did you cover the Iowa caucuses?
I did the midterm.
Okay. So tell me what that's another gear shift, mental gear shift, to write for the New York Times. What's that all about? How does one do that?
Man. So not the traditional way. And I think I may have shared this story, but I'll share it again. So, you kind of put yourself out there. So I had written a few books and had a couple magazine articles, and I was on LinkedIn, which is a great way. If you want to do kind of business of writing, LinkedIn is a great way to do that because I've actually gotten a lot of work that way. So Bloomberg News found me I was living in North Carolina. They found me on LinkedIn, and they said John Edwards had just been indicted for campaign finance fraud. This was a few years ago. And they said, can you cover, it's going to be in the courthouse. You're close, our regular guy, we can't find him. Can you go do that? And I said, sure. So being that I'm not always in touch with reality or what's going on in the world, I got off the phone and was very excited that Bloomberg News contacted me. And I said to my wife, so John Edwards, did he kill somebody? Who is this guy? The candidate for presidency. Oh, that's not Edwards, the guy that cheated on his wife.
Yeah, try to keep up.
Right. So I got dressed and they called me back and they said, well, we found a regular guy, so we don't need you. Thank you so much for your time. And I said, I'm already heading out there. So I'm going to the federal courthouse. I said, I'll write that story better and quicker than the other guy. I said, you don't have to pay me anything. I said, but consider if you like what I write, that you'll hire me for the rest of the trial, because I knew it was probably going to be a long trial.
You without a journalism degree.
Yes, no, never had written anything in journalistic. So I did exactly what I said I was going to do. And my wife was waiting outside because when you go into a federal courthouse, all you get is a pencil and paper. You don't get any electronics. And so I wrote it. The guy that they had hired was sitting right next to me, and I could just see he was doodling, half paying attention to what was going on. So I wrote it up real quick. I called it in, and they ran my story instead of his, and they hired me for the rest of the trial. And not their traditional way to get in, right? So how did I end up writing for the other folks? So when I started showing up, they all know each other. I mean, all these different news outlets, they're all friends. They all know each other. And I was the new guy. Here I am, just some guy. And they said, what J school did you go to? I said, I didn't go to J school. I went to, I said, my degree's in psychology and music. And they said, well, what other pieces have you written? I said, none. And I said, well, how long have you been a journalist? I said, about 20 minutes. So I must have endeared myself to them because they tried to help every way they could. And I had a good editor that was very patient with me because, that is a totally different kind of writing. That's something that I understand why people go to school. So what I started doing, because I have no shame, was I started inviting out all of the editors or all of the bureau chief and New York Times and the different editors that were there, or the producers. And I said, look, I'm writing for Bloomberg, kind of as a stringer. I said, why don't you hire me to do some stuff? So I just went to each of them and did the same thing, and they all hired me, and they continue to use me today. And so even the Today Show, that was kind of that same kind of thing, which was I knew somebody, and I said, well, talk to your editor, see if they need somebody else to do some writing for them.
Well, and broadcast writing is entirely different than print.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So, I was writing articles for their site, and then they take some of those articles, and then you have to do the rewrite for the show if they want that. So it's like, man, that was some of the hardest writing I've done in my life, because you have to.
Yeah, but they probably pay pretty well too, right?
Yeah, they actually, of the places I've worked, they do pay much better. But it was. I haven't written for them for a while, but just because it was all consuming, it was hard. Mm-hmm. I had to write, edit, produce, mm-hmm. do everything within like a ridiculous time frame.
Oh, I can remember. I was a writer at CNN early in my career at the network. It must have been 88 or 89, and it was like a plane crash or something. And my job was to write the update. If you're just joining us, this is what's happening. And the supervising producer came down from his perch, stood over my right shoulder, shouted in my ear, put a period on it now. So it's.
Did you get it?
Yeah. Yeah, I went one more sentence and then I put a period.
Right. Yeah. Put that zinger in the end.
Exactly. So here's my question. Did you ever cover a Trump rally?
I tried to, and they wouldn't let me in.
Okay. Well, there's probably a good reason for that, but we won't go there.
It was who I was representing. They wouldn't let me in.
And you were at the time representing whom?
New York Times.
Fake news, right?
Right, wouldn't let me in.
Then that goes where I want to talk about with you next, and that is the whole fake news thing, because you're a reporter, you're trying to find out the facts, the truth, or at least a piece of the mosaic of the bigger capital T truth. Tell me what it's like to interface with people who consider you the enemy of the American people. What's that like to be on that end of it?
It has changed, and again, I haven't been in journalism quite as long as you have, but it has changed the way people, even if I'm approaching them on a story, if I say I'm from New York Times or say I'm representing, I get a lot of yelling, because obviously I'm the enemy, and I said, well, that's kind of why I want to talk to you, so I can get what you're saying, so I can put that into an article, so that we can put the real stuff there. But it can be a conversation killer to say that I write for New York Times.
So how do you overcome this? Or do
I don't mention it. I just don't, or if I'm coming with a group of people, I have to spend a certain amount of time alleviating their fears and giving them the idea that I'm trying to give them a voice, and that if people would just trust the media to give them a voice, but the more that they resist or don't want to, then the fake news, which there is a bit of that out there,
sure, oh yeah,
will take its place, because as you know, there won't be a void in news. There'll just be something to fill that void. So whether it's good news or we're guessing at it news, there's going to be something. You're not going to get a blank paper at the New York Times tomorrow. You're going to have something there. So the more that people can trust the media and give us their voice and allow us to express that. And the thing that people don't realize about what we do is what I say is vetted so much they vet every time that I have an editor call me from New York or wherever they want me to do an article with them. They vet me first. They ask me questions. Have I ever been to a rally? What my political affiliations? They'll want to know if I've ever written for another this or that, and they'll look me up before they'll ever put me on a case, because they want to make sure they're getting unbiased news.
Well, but then after you've covered something and you're submitting it for editing and publication, have you ever been pressured to, insert something that is basically, they're trying to insert something in some way, a point of view, or skew your coverage? What's it like, to have been on the ground and be second guessed by, an editor in New York? Or does that happen at all?
It has. And so that goes to the integrity of the reporter, right? So if I have somebody that's quoted something, what's the spin, right? So how are they spinning that? And if I have somebody's quote, and then you're going to put them, and then if an editor puts the meaning of that or why they said that, I would say that's not what they said. You've just now taken a whole paragraph, you took out one sentence, and now you've flipped the meaning of it.
So you've had that conversation with editors.
Take my name off of it. If you're going to publish that, take my name off of it.
And what happened? And they changed it. They changed it back. They changed it back. Just to clarify, they've changed it back to the way you had it.
Yes.
Okay.
Or
does that happen very much?
Not very much, but it does happen. But the other thing they'll do sometimes is, if it's not juicy enough, they'll kill the story.
What do you mean
I
juicy?
Spend 2 days on it, and the story never happens. I get paid for it either way.
What do you mean juicy?
Meaning that they wanted a certain amount of if it bleed, it leads, right? That there's something there. They want me to investigate something. If there's nothing there, then it's just not a story. Then they just move on to something else. And I think there's some integrity to that, not to make something that there isn't, or to postulate or to aggregate from a different news source. Now that's probably the biggest thing I've run into consistently, which is they get news from somewhere else and it was wrong to begin with. That happens pretty often, and so they send
you to check it out, and
right.
You find it's a nothing burger.
Or they'll start putting, like, let's say, I don't want to pick on anybody, but let's just say the AP said blah blah blah. So if they said that, I'm going to check up on that. So I'm going to ask the source, is this what you said? Because I don't want to restate something that wasn't stated right to begin with.
Right.
And that takes some work, a little bit more extra work. But if my name's on it, I want it to be what I heard, right? Not what somebody else said, and I'm just repeating it.
Well, so here's my question. You now have experience as a journalist. You have now experience writing fiction. You have experience writing nonfiction books, ghostwriting, and you run a vineyard and a publishing company. Of all of those things, which one do you like the best?
I probably like the fiction the best, because I can create a world that I want to create, right? So there's no expectations except my own. And so I enjoy that. That's why I started writing to begin. I mean, to be honest with you, that's why I started writing. I mean, as a little kid, I was a latchkey kid, so I spent a lot of time in libraries growing up, especially during the summer. And so I would just read. And they had a room there, and I remember asking my mom for paper because I just started writing stories. So that was my love for writing to begin with. That's why I wanted to get into writing. So I've gone different ways, and I've learned how to write. But I think I'm back to where I wanted to start. And it's interesting because the characters and stuff in the story that I wrote for my son were based on characters of my favorite books as a kid. Mm-hmm. Pirates and genies and all those sorts of things.
In the few minutes we've got left, I teach writing a lot, and I work with a lot of writers, as do you. And I think a universal theme that is across the board in the relationships I've got with writers and wannabe writers is fear. It's that paralyzation that one feels when they look at the blank page and they freeze because they know it's not going to be perfect. They're afraid of making mistakes, and so they're just the deer in the headlights. They don't go forward. How have you, as an individual, dealt with fear in terms of just your life, and also apply that to your writing?
Well, that's a big question, right? I mean, that's where I find a lot of writers to begin with that want to write with me, is that they've been working on a book for 10 years, can't get out of the first chapter. So, and I think it is fear. But as you've heard from my own story, I did things. I mean, here I'm writing journalism. I had probably no business doing it, but I did it, right? And I think that's what people need to do. Is my goal is always to get that draft finished. Just put it on paper. I mean, there's plenty of. I mean, everybody's first draft is crap. We all know it. But if we try to perfect it, my view is that you're using a different part of your brain. It's a left-right brain kind of hemisphere. When you start analyzing and becoming analytical and changing and editing, the creativeness is kind of gone. So you're in a different focus. And I think what people do is they start creative and then they go to that analytical too soon. And I think that's where the fear goes, is that if I don't make it perfect, then I can't move on. So it's just keep writing it. And the other thing I tell people is handwriting it, because when we type it, I think we're using a different part of our brain, but we're able to see everything we've written. If we're writing in a notebook, we're just flipping pages, right? So we're just going forward. And that's the momentum that I try to get writers to get into, is that forward momentum. You're just writing and writing and writing. It's going to be crap, and we can fix it. And that's what editing and all those things are for afterwards, which nobody likes to do, but we all have to do. But that's what makes a great book, right? Is to take that time to fix it. Writing a book takes a lot less time than editing a book, in my opinion, right?
I don't know. I do that. I'm really good at procrastination, so I can go for years and procrastinate
writing
and then I do write it. But the fun part for me is the editing, because it's the steaming pile of clay, and then you can go back and make it better.
But I think when you're talking about some other writers, that's where the fear comes. So if they get feedback or critique, then the first question they have in their mind is they didn't like it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Rather than saying, "Oh my gosh, here's an opportunity," they like it. They're spending the time to give you the feedback, which people don't see that as, "I like it, and so I want to help you make it better," right? Different mindset. But I think it's that fear of somebody not liking it. And in the end, some people are going to like it, some people aren't, right? But the thing is that you're creating what you want to create. You're writing what you want to write. And you just have to push forward and just trust that in the end, you can decide to take it out to the barbecue and set it on fire. If that's what you want to do, you got it out of your system. But, I think we all have some stories there, right? And we just have a hard time getting them out because of that fear and that over-analysis. That's that analysis paralysis. We're just analyzing that. Nobody's going to like it. It's stupid. My writing's bad. Look, you just heard my story, and anybody listening to this could realize I had no education in writing, none. Yeah. Didn't have again, psychology, music, creative arts, but no writing. But I became a better writer by doing it. And that's it. You just got to do it and put it out there.
Well, this has been fun. You're a fun person, and we've tipped a few in the past, and I hope we get a chance to do it again in person again.
Absolutely.
But this has been great. I didn't know about your publishing company. I'll put it up on the screen once more. It is Lost Vineyard Press, and let me see if I can make sure I get it up there. Yep. lostvineyardpress.com. So if you're a writer and you've got a manuscript, then I encourage you to go to John's website and find out what his guidance is on how to submit a query, and you've got a sense of who this guy is. So maybe this will be a match made in heaven. You never know. And I hope you and I get a chance to work together or be on the circuit together or whatever.
Love to.
Yeah, thank you. I hope we get a chance to do this again sometime. I've been one-to-one with John Peragine. He's a writer, a ghost writer, a wine enthusiast, and a fun guy. Thanks, John. It's good to see you. Take care.
Bye-bye.